Hey everyone, I hope you're doing okay right now in this crazy time. I hope you're all staying safe and healthy. As you can see, I am self-quarantined in my parents' house in mid-Michigan.
So my parents just moved into a new house and I kind of just took over one of the empty rooms, so yeah.
I'll be here until further notice, until this all shakes out and it's safe to get back to my place in Los Angeles again. Oh, I didn't even realize these were on. Sorry about this. Got my retainers.
Ew.
Pop these bad boys out real quick.
Disgusting.
Alright.
Gross, bro.
That's better. So one of the things that I've been working on right now, aside from editing my last video about Grease.
Grease lightning, go Grease lightning.
If you haven't seen it yet, go check it out. What I've been working on is going through my comic book collection. And yeah, I know what you're thinking. Damn, dude, that is pretty nerdy. Oh, you don't even know how nerdy I'm about to get with these details. So I have been collecting comic books since I was a kid, and just ever since I was a kid, I've been a huge fan of superheroes in general. I would dress up as superheroes for Halloween or just for fun, and I was super into the TV shows, the comic books, the movies, everything paraphernalia related with superheroes in general. Especially, as you can tell, Spider-Man.
I want Spider-Man!
And so that continued as I got older and became an adult. Well, and you ask again, how big of a fan are you? And I'd say I'm a pretty big fan, you know, big enough to literally go dressed up as characters from the Avengers to the theaters with some of my nerd crew. Multiple times. But before we dive deeper, I'll set this video up with kind of like a background story of what we're going to get into.
Alright, story time.
So a little over 3 years ago, right before I moved to LA, I was living in my parents' house, and my dad had mentioned to me that one of our neighbors was having a garage sale, and he said that they were selling some comic books. So me, being the comic book collector and just superhero fan in general, I figured I'd go check it out and maybe get a couple. Long story short, I ended up leaving with 3 big boxes of comics for just $200, which it seemed like a steal because I knew comics, you know, fairly well, and it seemed like some of the comics maybe were a little bit older, some pretty cool characters and stuff. So I'm like, yeah, it's probably definitely worth it. The only problem was, shortly after I got a job offer in Los Angeles, and within the month I had to move out, and I wasn't able to bring the comics with me, and just in that time I wasn't able to really go through and really see what I even had. So for the last 3 years, these comics have just been sitting in my parents' house, collecting dust essentially. So now that I'm home and looking for things to do, I figure I'd check them out, you know, see what I got, see if maybe I can make a little money off of them. Yeah, that's right, even in a pandemic, I'm a young entrepreneur. So, here's what I did.
I first took all of the comics out of the 3 boxes and tried to organize them by characters or titles and separated them into 3 groups based on the publishers: Marvel Comics, DC Comics, and other miscellaneous publishers. Once I had them broken up more, I then put them in alphabetical order by title, and then in order by issue number. Once everything was in order, I then entered every comic into an Excel spreadsheet and made separate tabs so it was easy to find a character name or title in the future. Finally, I then went and looked up the estimated price of each and every comic, mostly using the website comicbookrealm.com, so that I would be consistent with the estimates and entered them in the spreadsheets along with the original price of the comics, just for comparison.
And I know what you're thinking.
Holy shit.
That is one of the nerdiest things that you could be doing with your free time. Young entrepreneur. So after I was all done doing this, which took about like a week of all my evenings, this is what I found. I was able to find a ton of really great comics. And then I found some pretty interesting comics as well with the bunch. Just a few of the interesting ones were Elvra's Haunted Holiday Special, because you just love this creepy woman sitting on Santa's lap. You got Captain Carrot and his amazing zoo crew.
Okay.
You have the classic character from the 80s television show, Elf, which I now pretty much own the entire comic book series of. So if anyone's looking for some Elf comics, I'm your boy. Hit me up, playa. And my personal favorite of the bunch, Pope John Paul II. Yeah, that's a comic book, people. So for the 697 comics that I had purchased in that garage sale, after everything was all added up, I had an estimated worth of just under $5,700 worth of comics. So I may be a nerd, but at least I'm a nerd with some money. Or you were like, oh, what's that? I can't hear you over all this money I'm making. So it turns out that the guy that I had bought the comics from had a legit collection. Most of them being #1 issues, early issues, or just somewhat popular comic book covers. And pretty much all of them spanned from the 70s and 80s. And I know what you're thinking. Are those comics really worth that much? Well, that's kind of the catch. There isn't exact values for each individual comic book. A lot of the values of comic books is dependent on supply and demand, and it really changes over time. For example, Iron Man wasn't nearly as popular until it was made into a movie starring Robert Downey Jr. And with that coming out and being popular, that could potentially affect the price of some of the older, maybe Iron Man comics. It's also dependent on the condition of the comic as well. So with that being said, there's a lot of determinant factors that come in hand. So the next thing that I did was look at some of my potentially more valuable comics, and then I compared them on a site called Maven.io. So this site compares collectible items either previously sold or currently for sale and compares the prices of them. So after doing this, I had a better idea of what I could potentially sell my comics for. What I was able to determine after comparing between the different websites and just kind of looking to see how they compare in the market, I still have some really great comics and that are worth a decent amount of money, but not as high as I had initially anticipated. So for example, one of the comics that I got in the garage sale was this issue right here, Black Panther #1. And although this comic is in great shape and I had initially valued it $100 and could potentially even range up to $750, realistically I'd probably only get 30 or 40 bucks because that was what was sold on average, maybe 50 or 60, just kind of depending on the condition and the seller that I could maybe get it at. And this was pretty common for the majority of my comics that I had looked up. So now that I know the potential prices of these comics, what is it going to take to sell them? Comic book stores are amazing because you can sell all these comics to them at one time.
I'd like to sell some comic books.
Oh, well, I know all about that. Step 1 is flunk out of art school.
These nerds are so funny.
The only problem is they're not going to be offering as much as you could get potentially online. You have to remember that they have to turn a profit as well, so they're not going to buy them at these, super high value prices. So your best bet is to then sell them online, but you have to keep in mind that you're not going to be able to sell all these to one place. A lot of the times you'll have one person looking for one individual comic, or at least a small grouping of comics, which can be very time consuming, obviously, if you're selling them individually. So I know you're just sitting, waiting in anticipation, wondering, what am I sitting on? What am I sitting on here? What is the value of my comics? And after just kind of estimating, just kind of looking at stuff, really I'm probably sitting on maybe $2,000–3,000 of comics, so about half of what I had initially anticipated, which is still amazing. And I don't even know if I'd want to sell a lot of these comics anyway, because they're really great comics, just great collector's items in general.
Radioactive Man number 1000, please.
$10. I laugh at you.
So I may not be ballin' like Curry.
Ballin' like Curry.
Nah, I'd say I'm more ballin' like Darko Milicic. That's a little Detroit Pistons reference. So for those of you that don't know, there was this player that was drafted in the 2003 NBA draft. He was picked #2 in the draft behind LeBron James.
LeBron James.
But he was drafted before Carmelo Anthony, Chris Bosh, Dwayne Wade, and a bunch of other great players. But in his career, he only averaged a whopping 6 points per game. But he made $52 million in his career. Now he's just chilling, sitting on that money in a farm in Serbia. So I may not have a diamond in the rough like I was expecting, but just like Darko Milicic, I'm going to be sitting on a little bit of money, and I'm going to be just fine. Alright, so that's going to do it for this video. I hope you enjoyed my nerd talk about comics and then getting completely derailed by an obscure NBA basketball player that had nothing to do with what we were talking about. Thanks so much, and hopefully I will see you next time if you're still with me at this point. Thanks everyone, stay safe. Forgot to turn this on. I have a mustache as well.